It's the night for the third 2025. The time is 6 minutes past 10, and there are very many F1 news and update threads at which we need to pull. MrBeast yeeting it into the barrier Formula E, and I've got some takes. Christian Klein chiming in on Charles Leclerc's not insubstantial advantage over one Sir Lewis Hamilton. Prost chiming in on social media and be at the hands of the Senna documentary or docu-series on Netflix. So too we'll talk about some Netflix Drive to Survive at the altar of McLaren episode called The Wheels of Fortune. Oh, the humanity, techier than techie things. So too we'll chime in on Jos Verstappen saying that his son won't be to blame if he doesn't win himself a driver's championship. So too Jos Verstappen, father as Max, has chimed in on the rumour and speculation that Maximilian Verstappen, for some say soon to be 5-time champion, might end up at Mercedes. Let's talk to it. MrBeast shoots it into the barrier first and foremost. Formula E are doing something a bit crazy at the moment, aren't they? Leveraging all of these god tier YouTubers with a view to promote their own sport. A rising social media tide, some say, floats all boats. And this Formula One entity, they've done some dodgy things. You'll recall that the chief head honcho of Formula E said to Maximilian Verstappen, if you can turn this around last year, I want to say, then I will donate X amount to charity. I want to say it was something like 200,000-300,000, and he followed through. This dude's doing some creative things with a view to promote his formula. I would contend, however, Formula E will never be Formula One. If that is his strategic objective, then he's doomed before he gets out the gate. However, yesterday, he's put in one of his Formula E cars, the biggest by subscriber YouTubers to have ever YouTubed. That dude has a name, and his name is MrBeast. Put him in the Formula E car with some training, and the inevitable happened was that, of course, MrBeast yeeted it into the barrier. Have you guys seen this footage? I would bring it up, but I don't want to get destroyed by copyrights et al. What are we doing here? Absolute nonsense. MrBeast drove the Formula E car like he's never driven a car before. You know, one of them ones. Tried to put his foot down on what I think is a rear wheel drive car when the front wheels were not straight. Schoolboy error, and you end up in the barrier. The reaction on social media was chaotic. This is what happens, they say, when you put a YouTuber in a car that he's not capable of managing. I don't know where I stand on this. I think it's a worthy endeavour. Sometimes you got to try and promote a sport, but to put a YouTuber in there, the biggest one to have ever YouTubed, I think sounds like a good idea from a marketing perspective. From a performance perspective, if we're analysing this endeavour through the lens of performance, then of course it was going to end badly. What do you expect? He's MrBeast, for crying out loud. He's not Michael Reagan-Meister Schumacher. But again, sometimes you got to wear different caps. And I think this is the foibles, no travails of the purist sector of the community. Unless it's a die-hard racer or a 7-time champion, most of the purists are not interested. Do you know what I mean? Wheels of Fortune, Rafa, we'll get to it. Jody says, wow, that should be so interesting to see how he'd stack up against Charles as a teammate. Mate, go on, we'll get to that, I promise. MrBeast shoots it into the barrier. That's your first topic on the dock. Let's talk about some Jos Verstappen on Max, because Jos Verstappen has chimed in even, and he said, listen, if Max Verstappen doesn't win himself a World Drivers' Championship in 2025, it won't be his fault. By the way, the latest odds per the odds makers are that Maximilian Verstappen has a 20% chance now of winning the World Drivers' Championship. 20%. I can't remember a time over the last 3 years when you could have gotten such good odds on Max Verstappen 20% of the time. Lest we forget, that means if you run a simulation of this championship 100 times, Max wins only 20 of them. What? Does this make sense? If past his prologue, surely that's got to be off. 22, 23% maybe, but 20% as low as. And in stark contrast, Lando Norris now set at 40%. Double the probability of a Maximilian Verstappen. Listen, I'm not sure that passes the smell test, Jody. Daniel, I don't believe it to be true. Twice? No, that makes no sense. And Jos Verstappen chimes in on this, saying that if Max Verstappen doesn't win a Drivers' Championship this year, then it won't be his fault. Of the circumstance around Aston Martin and Mercedes looming, waiting in the wings to sign one Max Verstappen, he says, well, it had been decided for a very long time that Max was going to stay at the Bulls that are red. He continues, and I quote, we have confidence in the team and we give them our trust, but it won't be Max's fault if things don't go well. They must continue to perform. They need to keep building a good car. That's important. You guys have heard me say this a gazillion times, and I will reiterate for the avoidance of doubt, for the discerning-eyed amongst you. Max has always said that he needs a few things. First, semblance of harmony. That might have gone to pot now with Netflix dredging up old bones of Christian Horner allegation gate. So too, the beef between Jos and Christian, it seems like they're on talking terms now, but it seems like a marriage of convenience. It is still bad blood between the team principal and father of Max Verstappen. Austria versus Thailand, Austria versus the UK, British financiers involved, and some say that there's legal action pending potentially against Christian Horner. Listen, I think this is going to run as a narrative. I think this plot line doesn't go anywhere as we head into Australian Grand Prix season 1 or first race, season 1, season 7, episode 1, if we're using Drive to Survive terminology. Go on then, and on. Jos Verstappen has tweeted out a response to speculation that Maximilian Verstappen might be at Mercedes as soon as 2026. Jos Verstappen responded on Twitter that this is absolute nonsense, and some F1 journos like to write such things just to get clicks. I would push back on Jos Verstappen because there are two evidence portions. Exhibit A being the fact that we know that Max Verstappen was conducting negotiations, having conversations with Toto, the boy who cried wolf, as at the Miami Grand Prix last year. Exhibit B, over the course of the summer break, there was a second round of conversations had. We know already that Max Verstappen has a performance clause in his contract that means if the performance under the car doesn't facilitate, enable a challenge for the World Drivers' Championship this year, then as at race 3, Suzuka, if word on the F1 curb is something that you want to be invested in, that he can null and void his contract with immediate effect. Take that for whatever you will. That's where the speculation comes from. Jos Verstappen. It's techie. What's up, Neil? How you doing? It's obvious Lando wants to go to Ferrari. He's got at least 2 road Ferrari. I know, we'll get to it, Neil. I promise you. It's going to get... that whole thing is chaos, by the way, going into this season on the back of Drive to Survive. Go on, let's talk about it now. In fact, let's talk about Klein first. Couple of other topics on the docket before I get to Lando Norris. Christian Klein, one-time Red Bull driver, has chimed in speaking the obvious about Charles Leclerc's not in substantial advantage over Sir Lewis car going into 2025. Older story in F1 history, right? If you're an old head at a team, then somebody brand new coming in is going to find it very difficult to beat the incumbent. Why? Because it's length of service, it's tenure, it's relationships. The oldest truism in F1 history is that you win and or lose championships by dint of your ability to sign and keep good people. Please see Exhibit A, Red Bull losing out the door very recently. Jonathan Wheatley, Rob Marshall, Adrian Newey, Fallows too. What's happened over there? Nobody's not going to tell me that you can that it's impossible to draw a dotted line of causation between those heads who have left out the door and Red Bull's drop off in performance. No. Christian Klein says, though, that Charles Leclerc, by dint of his experience, will have a durable competitive advantage as far as the mission that is to beat his teammates over the first few races and establish a driver hierarchy of sorts. We have it on good account that Ferrari potentially not wanting to lose championship points or indeed a championship of the constructors and or drivers variety at the altar of McLaren's underperformance, failing to establish a driver hierarchy even. We have it on good authority that as at Monaco, whichever one of those Ferrari drivers is in front is who they will put their efforts behind. Christian Klein says that there's pressure on Sir Lewis Hamilton this year to get out the gate. He's a god tier around Australia, normally. But what Lewis Hamilton isn't god tier at is getting out the gate quick. Lewis Hamilton, if past this prologue, likes to play his way into the crease, kicks in proper and becomes god tier, let's say around race 4, 5, 6. But he won't be able to do that. He won't have time this year, some will say. Christian Klein continues, and I quote, "He seems extremely motivated, does Lewis, to me, and he sees the big Ferrari challenge with both hands, but that doesn't mean anything yet, because in the end, it's all about final results." And I've heard a couple of people say similar things of late. Some Italian journos are saying that Ferrari have gone too hard too soon as far as their marketing effort, that ultimately, sometimes you want to keep your powder dry. Move in silence and only speak, some say, when it's time to say checkmate, that sort of thing. And that maybe this hyperbole as far as the marketing effort behind Sir Lewis' car sometimes sets unnecessarily unrealistic expectations, some say. Christian Klein says he's got to compete against Charles Leclerc, and that's not going to be an easy task. Point to point man, quickest on the grid, some say. He's been driving for Ferrari for years, has Charles, and so he knows everything and everyone within Scuderia. That is a huge advantage to him, and it will not be easy for Hamilton to beat Leclerc, but it will be a fantastic battle. Fortunately, Fred Vasseur, team boss, he has Fred Vasseur, team boss, behind him, and he's someone who knows how to manage this. He also has so much experience, and he will make the team handle it perfectly well. Here's hoping. Just fast forward. Inject Australia into my veins, for it cannot come soon enough. Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton. I mean, come on. Do you even get any more gangbusters or blockbuster than that as an F1 story? And there are a gazillion of those, right? Can Max Verstappen take the balls that are red back to the mountaintop? Notwithstanding bookmakers saying that he has only 20% chance of doing so. Oh, the humanity. Go on, let's talk about this McLaren piece and DTS. So look, I've been watching DTS on and off. You guys knows that I've enjoyed myself some DTS in the past. Drive to Survive, for the avoidance of doubt, is what the acronym stands for. Netflix's docu-series. However, the criticism that purists have of Drive to Survive is that at times they can be liberal with the truth. Sometimes you've got to suspend your disbelief. As an example, in the George Russell episode, Lewis Hamilton, I think it's called Looking After Number One, where Toto, the boy who cried wolf, is having discussions with his missus about who should replace Sir Lewis, in addition to him reconciling his feelings and emotions at having Sir Lewis Hamilton leave the team that he hoped he would end his career with. In that episode, half of it, the latter half, deals with George Russell and whether he's ready to step into those not insubstantial shoes that Lewis Hamilton has left vacant. In that episode, we look and we see some of his mistakes, but all of those bloody mistakes, as near as makes no difference. We're in 2023. Drive to Survive Season 7 is looking at 2024. No, that's your Exhibit A. As your Exhibit B, as far as their ability to suspend disbelief or be very liberal with the truth, at the very least, as far as Netflix's producers are concerned. As your Exhibit B, you only want to look at the way that they conveyed Spa. Spa was the big crescendo, the big comeback of one George Russell. Him showing in real time, proof positive, case in point, that he's capable of leading that team back to the mountaintop, that George Russell is ready to be what Sir Lewis Hamilton has been for bloody, as near as makes no difference, 10 years to Mercedes and the boys and girls from Brackley and Brixworth. However, in that episode, when they showed the big crescendo, the big comeback from King George Russell of King's Lynn, Norfolk, they neglect to mention that at Spa, what happened in the end, chat? What happened? He got disqualified, didn't he? He was underweight, so ultimately he didn't leave the Spa-Francorchamps race weekend with 25 points. Just you know, Netflix, never let truth get in the way of a good story. And herein lies the problem with Drive to Survive. No, they will patch things together with a view to tell a story to people who can't have been watching that in real time, because they will know the truth. They will pick holes in the narrative and shine a light on the falsification. And that doesn't, I mean, it's not great, eh? As a part-time purist, part-time casual, I love Drive to Survive with the best of them. Carlos Sainz as an episode is fantastic. I would argue that the first episode documenting Christian Horner's chaos is an absolute fantastic episode because we're seeing footage that we would never, ever have seen otherwise. That's what Drive to Survive is for. But the critique will always be this. Don't weave together plot lines that don't belong together. Don't show me George Russell's win in inverted commas at Spa-Francorchamps as if it stood and as if we don't know as F1 fans that he got disqualified post-race. Don't neglect to mention that because then you're not telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. That's a problem, Daniel, Umach, Benzi. We can't stand for that. And under that umbrella heading, you watch the episode titled Wheels of Fortune, which deals with all of the nonsense and chaos that McLaren got involved in at the altar of indecision and incompetence. If, as an example, McLaren had just said, you know what, Lando Norris is the one with more experience. He is our number one driver. And Oscar Piastri, therefore, by extension, is our de facto number two. Can you imagine how many points they would have gathered around Hungary and Silverstone as an example? Austria potentially, because again, they would have been ramping up the pressure on the bulls that are red by then. Can you imagine how many more incremental points they would have gained over the course of the season if they've just been clear? And that episode, The Wheels of Fortune, and again, The Wheels of Fortune, the etymology, the genesis of that name comes from the fact that Zak Brown was once upon a time on the Wheels of Fortune, and that was his first break. These winnings from that, he pedaled into his karting career. That was his first financial resource that he leveraged to get his foot in the door as far as his racing career, which is important, right? Because Zak Brown has become maybe not the greatest racing mind, but a fantastic commercial asset to McLaren. He's the one that gets the Google Chrome logo on that car as an example. Zak Brown is 1,000% an asset. Now we can talk about the McLaren ownership and its journey another time, but again, that doesn't happen without Zak Brown. You could argue that their journey as far as their design philosophy and their leap up the grid doesn't happen without Zak Brown and some of his wheeling and dealing in the background. However, the Wheels of Fortune, the takeaway is this. Driver hard creep. You'll recall at Monza, Oscar Piastri put a wheel up the outside of Lando Norris going into the second chicane. Absolute chaos and carnage, much to the disenchantment of McLaren and papaya-coloured fans all around the world. What are you doing, Oscar? Lando Norris is caught in the middle of a title fight with Max Emilian Verstappen. There are no quarters given. Can't afford to lose points against this chap. Again, if you harbour aspirations of winning a championship against the fire-breathing dragon in Max in a Red Bull with Christian Horner at the helm, you can't afford to give up a millisecond of time, and definitely not to your teammate. So what was Oscar doing? Okay, some will say he was just being a racer. Listen, if you're going to leave the outside wide open like that, Lando, then that's you're in waters, deep waters, with a cut on your leg, shark infested. That's what you're doing if you're leaving that to Oscar. And Oscar said, listen, if you're going to leave the gap open, then I'm going to go for it. Lando, in stark contrast, said of their interaction, Monza chicane 2, if I'd known that Oscar was going to pull something like that, then I would have never left the room. Well, that's the bloody issue, Lando. Surely that's the principal point of contention, Lando. If you're racing anyone, even if he is your teammate, why are you going so conservative into the second chicane at Monza? You know who Oscar Jack Piastri is. We know who OJ Piastri is. He is a killer. No pun intended. You only need to look at Baku and the way that he dealt with Charles Leclerc. That overtake was not on. Reminiscent of one Danny Ricciardo. Came from a gazillion miles back. So Lando, you can't afford to do that. But yet and still, the team have got to bear some of the brunt of that responsibility now. Surely you tell them, listen, peloton settings, get clear. Like first and second lap, let's build the gap to Charles Leclerc and the rest. And then you guys can fight and we can manage it that way. In a post-race debriefing on the Wheels of Fortune episode, Season 7, Drive to Survive. You see the fallout. You see them debriefing And you hear Oscar Jack Piastri make the admission to one of his mates that, listen, maybe I shouldn't be putting big moves up the inside, up the outside even of my teammate. No kidding, Oscar Piastri. That's very bold of you, sir, to admit that after the fact. However, F1 purists, Oscar Jack Piastri fans will say, listen, he's a racer. What the hell do you expect him to do? Of course he's going to go round the outside, round the outside. He's a racer. What do you want him to do? This is survival of the fittest. On a long enough timeline, the survival rate is 0. Indeed, you might want to say, in contrast to the aforementioned, that it's not the strongest of the species that survives. It's the most adaptable to change. And Oscar Piastri around the second chicane at Monza, round the outside of his teammate Lando Norris, is nothing if not the embodiment of that. How can you hate Oscar Jack Piastri for just being a racer? It's like the Joker in Batman, right? Like, he's chasing cars, he's just being himself. That's ingrained in his DNA. And that's why some will argue, when they put the microphone in front of Christian Horner and asked him if you could sign one of the McLaren drivers, Oscar or Lando, today, which one are you signing? Christian Horner said, I'm signing Oscar. And that in stark contrast to a couple of years ago when they fought, scraped and clawed to sign one Lando Norris alongside his old mate, Maximilian Verstappen. I think that tells a lot. A lot of McLaren fans are predicting that Oscar could go, well, better than Lando even. I think that's a stretch personally, a tad premature. I think Lando would go well. I think Lando has absolute pace in hand on his old mate OJ Piastri, particularly in qualifying, or that was the case last year. But he's just not as clinical, is he? In the overtake, Benzi, he's just not as clinical. The irony of telling Norris to let OJ pass for the team as Piastri shafted the team. It's chaos, isn't it, Stephen? You could see, Stephen, to that point, you could quite literally see Lando Norris's countenance. Like, you could see the zest almost bleed out of his face. Like, you could see him in the post-race bit, and this is why Drive to Survive is brilliant, right? Because we see all these bits and bobs that otherwise would have been left on the cutting room floor. At this post-conference, post-race debrief even, you can see Lando just looking. So there's two clips. There's one where you can see Lando looking, he's in the background, almost like blurred out, and you can see him looking directly at Oscar, as if to say, you may have cost me the championship just there with your overtake around the outside chicane. Because you know what happened on the back of that overtake and Lando having to take a consolidated line. Charles Leclerc comes past and ultimately goes on to win the Italian Grand Prix. So there's a domino effect. Oscar Jack Piastri cost not only himself but the team points. Zach Brown says in the post-race debrief that we made a mistake, that we fudged that up royally, and ultimately we cost ourselves a 1-2 by doing the McLaren thing and having two number one drivers and allowing them to race. It's naivete. Zach Brown, do you expect Santa Claus to come down your chimney this year as well and deliver your Christmas presents? Is that what we're dealing with here? Because those are the levels of naivete, some will say, that they had on display at Monza, at Hungary. What are we doing? Who is the favourite to win the championship of those two papaya-coloured drivers, if not Lando Norris? So then act like you know. You know what I mean? Like, what are we... It makes no sense. But I digress. So Oscar Piastri, we saw critically the upshot from that episode is that you saw the post-race debrief, or the very next race even, the pre-race debrief, when they were post-morteming what happened at Monza. And you hear Andrea Stella say, listen, we made a mistake. We can't afford for that to happen again. Oscar, we need to be pushing and pulling in the right direction here. All of us need to be singing from the same hymn sheet. Lando is the one with the most experience. Lando now is the one with the most points in the Drivers' Championship. Therefore, we need to gather around him. We all need to be singing from this Lando Norris Championship campaign hymn sheet. Significant, chat. Significant to hear Andrea Stella say that, because I'd never heard him come out and say we will effect team orders, and that was him effectively saying that. Whether they carry that into 2025 though is an absolute Oscar, says Umach, is another entity, another proposition altogether. I'm hoping that they do, because they will need to, if Lando is going to deliver on that 40% probability that the odds makers currently have him at. 40%. Twice the chance of Maximilian Verstappen. I think what's changing, chat, you want me to be honest? I think a lot of money is coming in on Lando Norris on the back of a couple of things. It's the consensus that he has the quickest car, and so too Max Verstappen in real time downplaying his chances. I don't think, says Max Verstappen, will have a chance of winning at Australia. That's why Max Verstappen is now 20%. But if I were a betting man, chat, do you know what I mean? Anytime you get Max at ridiculously attractive odds, 20%. I mean, I know some friends of mine, who had a cheeky financial resource nibble of Max Verstappen at 22%. Now you can get him at 20%. I mean, holy smoke. Baz, McLaren mechanic, said of Drive to Survive that he watched one episode of DTS on the flight from Sydney to Melbourne, first time since season 1, and it was absolute boulder dash. And this is where it gets divergent. Drive to Survive will always split the community, and I think that's its lot. If it wants to be gangbusters, if they want to continue to grow the fan base and attract the 18 to 35-year-old demographic and women to the sport, then it needs to be like that. You've got to tell a story. I remember Manish Pandey speaking about the Senna documentary, and he said there's some things that they had to exclude. Trying to tell a human story. As an example, some purists will say it's blasphemy that in the Senna documentary, the good one, the film one, that it's blasphemy, no sacrilege, that not once was there a mention of Senna Donington 1993. You recall 5th to 1st in one lap and then back to 3rd and then up to 1st. It's one of the greatest laps that you'll ever see in F1 history. In the Senna documentary Manish Pandey produced, there is not one mention of it. Chaos. But to weave a cohesive plot, a human story, he argues that it necessitated that they didn't mention it. Chaos. Sometimes you got to tell a story, eh, Moose? I agree with you. 5th, yeah, 5/10. That was Liam Lawson's his race pace, right? Doing his race simulations on day 2. And some would argue that Maximilian Verstappen is at least half a second down the road. In race pace, Lenecki says, Oscar's my man. Hope he can really challenge Lando. I think he's got a I think it's too soon, Lenecki. Just a bit too soon. If you're talking about Oscar, he would need to improve. I mean, Lando had him banged to rights last year. Let's be honest. Particularly in qualifying, right? Which is all of a sudden really weird because lest we forget 24 months ago, Oscar's strength was qualifying pace. And then he struggled to manage the tyres within the race. And now all of a sudden, it's Uno reverse cards as far as his capability. It's weird. I don't know. I think it might come a bit too soon. That's not me saying that Oscar's, Oscar in his final form won't be better than Lando in his final form. Lest we forget, this is Lando's 7th season. This will be Oscar's 3rd. So there's a variable, right, as far as their experience, a material one. Can you imagine Oscar Jack in his 6th season? I think compare like for like, Oscar going into his 7th season versus Lando going into his 7th season, and now we've got a different conversation. If not just because of the way that Oscar's so clinical in the overtaking move, like he's just ridiculous. I was watching the overtaking move that he pulled on Charles Leclerc, modern day Journalese at Baku. I mean, how? Not the overtaking maneuver on entry, but that he held it because he the minimum speed, the speed that he took through the corner was a chaos. So that he managed to stick the move and not yeet it into the barrier on the exit from the turn and he was close. There were millimeters. You could literally put an A4 piece of paper between Lando Norris, the right side of Lando Norris's wheels, and the barrier, and that's Senna-esque to me, in my humble opinion. And again, the way that you gauge young drivers is how bright their flame burns in their moments of brilliance rather than how consistent it is. Because consistency you can learn, you get that with experience, but being able to do that type of move, notwithstanding the cheeky mini DRS, but being able to pull that move on a Charles Leclerc, aka modern day Journalese, fire breathing dragon settings. I mean, I don't think there's many drivers in F1 history that could have pulled that move. Lewis in his pomp, Max in his pomp, Senna, Prost, Jim Clark. I don't think there's many. You could count on 2 hands the amount of drivers in F1 history that can pull that move on Charles Leclerc. It's techie. Weather.com shows showers. I know, I saw Romanch. It's going to get... right. Go on then. Let's talk about Lando to Ferrari, because that's why you guys are all here. Lando to Ferrari. Right. So the context is this. Red Bull, Christian Horner desperately wanted to sign Lando Norris when he had the opportunity circa 24 months ago. Lando said, no, I don't want to join a team that's been built in Max Verstappen's image. It would be unrealistic, therefore, to think that I have an opportunity to win a World Drivers' Championship at Max Emilian Verstappen's team, much to the disenchantment of the core F1 community, who would say, go there, Lando, take him on. I think I said something similar at the time. Why are you scared of Maximilian Verstappen? But again, line of least resistance thesis. Why would you go to Max Verstappen's home and think that you can beat him when you can build your own team at McLaren? At the time, because Red Bull had the quickest car, it seemed like a bit of a faux pas. It was a bête noire for many of the F1 community, but it makes sense, I think, with the benefit of a bit of hindsight and retrospect. Why would you go there? Now, however, in a cheeky interview, I want to say with CNN, he was asked if what on your bucket list, in your most vividest of dreams, if there were one team that you could race for one day, which team would that be? Lando starts to clam up and he doesn't want to answer the question. PR Lando comes over all of a sudden. He says, well, if some buts. And then he says, well, there's one team that everybody, if you're an F1 driver, would want to drive for. And they drive under a particular set of colours. Everybody wants to drive for them. Of course, he's talking about Ferrari. Tell me that you want to drive for Scuderia Ferrari without telling me Lando Norris. I think this is headline worthy, if I'm honest. I know that every driver wants to drive for Ferrari, but that came out of Lando Norris's mouth. That we know he already drives a Ferrari F40, one of the goatiest Ferraris to have ever Ferraried. The one that Ferrari built with a view to take it to the likes of Porsche, the first ever supercar, some will say. That Lando Norris drives that lets you know that he's in love already with the Tifosi, just as Sir Lewis was once upon a time and is now. Meaning, therefore, I wouldn't discount it. The last time that I heard somebody talk about the Tifosi and Ferrari like this was who? Sir Lewis, Carl Davidson, Hamilton. Oh, and remind me what happened there. You recall a couple of years ago we said that this is a very real possibility that Sir Lewis might end up at the red team with the yellow badge and black prancing horse atop. At that time, Sir Lewis, Carl Davidson, Hamilton fans and fundamentally said, Cameron, what are you talking about? This is never going to happen. Lewis will end his career at Mercedes. Is the team with the black car and the altruistic activities, etc., etc. Well, look what happened there. The winds of change in F1 are sometimes swift and unexpected. As at March 2025, Sir Lewis is about to embark on his first race in their red overalls with the yellow badge and black prancing horse atop. What say you now, Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes extremists, fundamentalists? You're not so loud now, are you? Talking about Lewis is going to stay at Mercedes for the rest of his life in perpetuity without good. But what are you talking about? How did that work out for you? Abbots of Unreason dining at the restaurant of confirmation, but just because you wanted him to stay at Mercedes, that doesn't mean that he's going to. And the worst joke is this, chat. If you listen to anything that Lewis Hamilton, this is why it's disrespectful of these Sir Lewis Hamilton fans to superimpose onto their hero, the dude who they want to spoon and worship, onto him their desires and what they want. Lewis, just listen to the chap. He's not a liar. Nothing if not a true sayer. Lewis Hamilton always said that on his bucket list as far as F1 that he wanted to drive in a red car. Oh no, it'd be best to stay at Mercedes, I think. No, stay at Mercedes. But he's told you, for Pete's sake, that he wants to drive the red car and he wants to wear those. Oh no, I think he'll stay at Mercedes. What? He's told you. No, we'll be at Mercedes for the rain. Loves Toto. But Lewis has told you, for Pete's sake, on more than one occasion. He sat opposite Toto, the boy who cried wolf, and told him that their timelines, their strategic objectives are now diverted. Oh, no. Lewis will stay at Mercedes. This is the Benzi. This is the point. I can't deal with Abbots of Unreason anymore. Honestly, it's a joke. And Abbots of Unreason and their theses permeate all of F1. But you know what? We'll shine a light on it, man. The falsification and fake news can't stand up to sound reasoning and investigations. You know what I mean? As soon as you start to pull at those threads, those theses just fall to the floor. Oh no, well, what you got to understand, Cameron, is that Lewis is because of like Mission 44 and not. What? Lewis wants to Peter D. Wins, a friend of the channel, has told you on a gazillion occasions that at core, Lewis just wants to win. All of that other stuff can fade to black. Honestly, Met Gala, cool, it's a nice to have, whatever. Rap albums, whatever. All Lewis Hamilton really wants to do is win. And the second that it became clear that he couldn't win at Mercedes, that as a going concern, that their goodwill was eroding in real time, sufficient to where the mountain that he would have to climb was prohibitively steep. Of course, Lewis is going to have a chat. And when they started talking about 1 year contracts, are you having a lot? I mean, come on. Don't forget the red under. Oh, Stephen, it's going to be priceless, says Benzi. Benzi, sometimes you've got to go on the attack. It's that. Oh, and speaking of attack, have you guys seen this final topic on the docket as we round third base? This is important now. Let me get my my big boy pants on to talk about this. Alain Prost has said that he's getting a lot of AB online. Alain Prost, multi-time champion, 3-time champion now, 85, 86, 89 and 93, 4-time champion. What are you talking about, Cameron? Put some respect on Alain Prost's name, therefore. How are we throwing SH1T at Alain Prost online? These young bucks who have just come into the sport via Drive to Survive. Yeah, Drive to Survive has its place and it's grown the sport. Of 1,900 North American fans surveyed, 53% say that they came in to watch the sport by dint of Drive to Survive. I get its importance, but bloody Nora, like, you mean to tell me you're going to go and watch a Netflix docu-series on Ayrton Senna, who, by the way, before he died tragically in 1994 at the Imola Grand Prix, San Marino then, as it was called, before he passed, had made peace with Alain Prost. Yeah, the two of them, okay, the etymology and genesis story of Prost and Senna. Of course, 1988 or 1987, Alain Prost, 2-time champion then, said to Ron Dennis, the next one after me will be Ayrton Senna, just the way that I took I took the chalice, the helm of Niki Lauda. I was the next one after Niki. Ayrton will be the next one after me. Go and sign him then, Ron Dennis said. I welcome that challenge. I'll beat him now and forever, Alain Prost. How wrong was he? There's no way that he could have known this was going to be an era-defining rivalry between the two. But Prost at the time said, Ron Dennis, go and sign him. Honda, he's the next one, and you want him in your cars. Ron Dennis said, all right then, I'll give this young Brazilian a chance. And the rest, as they say, was history. One of the era-defining, no sport-defining rivalries in Prost and Senna over the course of 88, 89 and 90. It was chaos between the two. And of course they didn't like each other, particularly in 89 and 90 when it was Suzuka, penultimate race of the season. Both times crashing, both times polemic circumstance. I'm not going to drudge up old polemics. There's no point. But how very dare people watch Senna for the first time and then start to throw dirt at Alain Prost, the legend, the 4-time champion, the man that, I mean, flipping, what are we doing, Remco? Actually being disrespected, Remco. Let me read out what Alan said, because it's techie. The dude wants to come off social media, so aggressive and frequent now is the dirt throwing at him. Here's what I'm going to read out the article verbatim, because I don't want to miss with this. It's an important one. Because, I mean, those that came before need to be respected. It's not just about 2025. It's about 85 and 86. And 89 and 93 years, all of which when Alain Prost took himself a World Drivers' Championship, and you want to throw dirt at that chap, and like, how very dare you? internet keyboard warrior. What are we doing? Here's what the article says. Former champion Alain Prost is fed up with online AB he has been subjected to as a result of Netflix's series Senna, which weren't even that good. Apparently so, I'm told. I haven't even watched it, I'll be honest with you. The rivalry between Ayrton Senna has often seen the Frenchman portrayed as the antagonist, the bad guy, the pantomime villain in modern accounts of the Brazilian driver's life. While Prost is debating whether to delete his online accounts, the FIA is coming to his rescue. What do we do? Daniel, Senna and Prost understood each other very well. They both wanted to win. The track wasn't big enough for both of them. It's not their fault nor disrespectful, but the way they were. But yeah, of course, 100,000%, Daniel. They were always destined to. They were the two best of their era, driving in the same Dayglow McLaren under Ron Dennis. It was always going to be that way. You know what I mean? Ron Dennis as well. Ayrton Senna was his guy. It was always going to be that. They were so, again, not dissimilar to Hamilton and Verstappen. They were so dissimilar as people, as far as the culture, like where they grew up and lived, but they were so similar as drivers. It was okay. So Ayrton was a bit more aggressive than Senna, but as far as their speed and their will to win and desire and resilience, like twin off each other, and that's why ultimately they bonded after they left it, after Senna left, right, or Prost left too. After Prost was the one who left and went to Ferrari, and then Senna continued as a McLaren driver and won in 1990 and 1991. But that's what I mean. Like how their relationship. Some say even, going into 1994, that Alain Prost retired 1993, right? And that Prost was, in Dark Knight when the Joker's talking about Batman as his raison d'etre, his reason for being. That I wouldn't know what to do without you, Batman. I'm a dog chasing a car. I wouldn't know what to do if I could get my hands on one. You are my antithesis, the yin to my yang. That's what Senna was to Prost. And as soon as you take Prost out of that equation, he wins his final championship in 1993. Going into 1994, some have argued, Senna's autobiographical bods have argued, that Senna didn't know where he was. Because no longer did he have his North Star in Alain Prost, because that chap was out the game now. So many occasions, even on the ill-fated San Marino Grand Prix weekend, Senna was picking up the phone to check with his old mate Alain to tell him that he doesn't know whether he feels up to this Grand Prix, to talk about his internal conflict now that he doesn't have his North Star in Alain Prost. So the two of them were bloody friends, for Pete's sake. So how do you consider yourself an F1 fan then and throw dirt at Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna's friend? They were talking on that ill-fated San Marino Grand Prix weekend. So what the fudge are you doing? How can you watch Netflix for the first time, the Senna documentary or the Senna docu-series, and think that you're going to watch that and that's the truth? Prost was the antagonist, and then you're going to go on, you're going to get in Alain Prost Twitter. Have some bloody respect, Noir. Prost was from Noir, the legend that is. Prost was phenomenal. I'm a diehard Senna fan. They respected each other tremendously. They were each other's yin and yang. You don't have Senna unless you have a Prost. That's the truth. And so how very dare these Twitter bods go at Alain Prost. Can you imagine? If I got a response from, I can't even tell you. Last year, Senna, a 6-part biopic about the Brazilian. And let me tell you this. If you're going to go and watch something on Senna, watch Senna. Don't watch this Netflix thing, like the 6-parter. Watch the film. The film is absolutely ridiculous. The soundtrack is bonkers. The story is brilliant. Again, they had to miss out for convenience and to tell a human story that was cohesive. They had to miss out certain instances like, of course, 1993 Donington, but we understand the reason why. They're probably the greatest lap that you'll see in F1 history, but it didn't fit the story. And so Manish Pandey said that they had to leave it out, but it's still, nevertheless, probably the best film on sack off this Brad Pitt thing that's going to come out at some point, summer this year. The F1, no. It will be nothing on the Senna film. I promise you, if you're an F1 fan, go and watch this. I don't know what they're talking about, this 6-part biopic that depicts bits of Argentina as naught. Like, I mean, come on, what are we doing here? But I digress. 6-part biopic about the Brazilian racing driver premiered on Netflix. In the series, Alain Prost will be portrayed as the villain through a number of fictional stories, which were, in Alain Prost's words, complete nonsense. That's how he described it to the German motorsporttotal.com this week. Almost everything says Alain Prost, 4-time champion, is completely fictionalized. I don't really want to talk about it anymore. Even before the series went online, Prost expressed his concerns to the French channel Canal Plus in an earlier documentary film about Ayrton Senna. He was also, as Casey, we're talking about Senna. They did portray, Manish Pandenko did portray Alain Prost as the antagonist. They did. There was creative license and poetic license in there, 100%, but nevertheless, still infinitely a better piece of cinematic film than this is. And I can say that without even watching it. I've spoken to some people who have. Not sure that I'm going to waste my time. There is always a hero and a villain, Alain Prost says. I know that there are some stories that are inserted that are completely made up and simply untrue creative license settings. I can't stop thinking about Ayrton in a good way and a bad way. For example, I'm considering deleting my Instagram account because I still get messages about it every day. From time to time, there will also hate messages in there. What are we doing, chat? I mean, there are no words. Sending messages of hate at Alain Prost. What? How? If you, and I don't want to put on my proselytizing cap, but if you know anything about F1, if you get the history, 85, 86, 93, 89, if you understand who Alain Prost is, that there is no F1 in its modern day form without Alain Prost, that there is no Ayrton Senna, not as we know him, without Alain Prost, that the two of them had reconciled their relationship when Alain Prost in 93 announced that he was going to retire as a 4-time champion. 4-time, not 1 or 2 or 3, 4-time champion Alain Prost, 85, 86, 89, 93, and that's the dude Alain Prost, the one that extended the visor so that he could capitalize on his extended peripheral vision for race pace and lap time. The dude that put mediums on one side of a car and hard compound tires on the right side, again with a view to optimize just because he could, just to see whether that would bring lap time and pace. That's the dude that you're going to go out on Twitter. I mean, genie. It's a joke. Sounds like French production are to blame. We're weird about French, but genie, it's chaos. Well, to portray someone as an antagonist is cinematic license. I agree with you, much, but it's chaotic, man. I know pantomime villain. I know I've said before that booing is pantomime, but this is something different. The legend that is Alain Prost, 4-time champion, to get in his DMs. What? Because you watched something on Netflix? How very? I mean. Don't come back. I want everybody to watch F1. I want the populace to grow and the demographic. I enjoy the more people that watch it. I think F1 is better for the new demographic, and I think that's beyond reasonable doubt. I couldn't engage any other argument without me being disingenuous. However, there is no space ever for anyone, irrespective of their proclivity and their opinions on the Senna-Prost circumstance and the legendary rivalry that it was, there is no space, no time for anybody to get in DMs of Alain Prost and say anything other than, mate, you're a 4-time champion. We owe you a debt of gratitude for your services to the upper echelon motorsport in the Wonder Fs. What are we doing here?